I want to tell you a story that some of you may remember. True story. At 8:08 in the morning, on January 13th, 2018, the people of Hawaii received the following emergency alert on their televisions, on their radio, and on their mobile devices. You know those really rude, loud emergency things? That's what they received. And excuse me, can you guys bring the sound levels down a little bit, please? The emergency alert said this: ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii. Seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. Now, can you imagine receiving that at 8 o'clock in the morning? That would get you out of bed quickly, wouldn't it? But can you imagine receiving that message? I mean, what would you think? What would you feel? What would you do? Perhaps you might fall to your knees or reach for the phone to call a loved one. It took 38 minutes before they released the false alarm notice. And one concerned son, this is a true story. It was on the internet, so it must be true. One concerned son sent a text message to his father about this, and his father responded, "Yeah, I know." He said, "People ran out screaming at breakfast." The son responded, "That's crazy. What did you do?" The father said, "The line went down, so I got more food at the buffet." Cleared out the place. Well, I suppose that's one way to respond to the imminent threat of death, is to get more food at the buffet. In the gospel today, Jesus speaks to the issue of the human desire for more. And he does so in light of our ever-present mortality. And he does this by telling a parable that's known as the parable of the rich fool. It's a businessman who's done well. But he's done so well, he's got no room to store his stuff. So he says, I'm going to tear down my barns, build a bigger one, which, technically speaking, is a pretty solid business plan. Bigger infrastructure, more capital, more results, bigger business, etc., etc. Except that he had forgotten one thing: that we're not made for this world alone. Jesus says, the Lord said to him, "You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you." The human tendency towards more and more, something we call greed, does appear foolish when we consider that we all have limited time and that the clock is ticking for all of us. The Oxford English Dictionary defines greed as an intense and selfish desire for something, especially wealth, power, or food. An intense and selfish desire. In our second reading today from Paul's letter to the Colossians, he refers to greed as idolatry. It's a very strange word. In fact, he seems to single out greed as particularly worthy of attention. I mean, he says, "Put to death, therefore, whatever in you is earthly," and he names a bunch of things: fornication, impurity, passion, evil desire. And then he says, "and greed, which is idolatry." Then we have the words of Jesus in the gospel today, who says, "Take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." So, guess what we're going to talk about this morning? Starts with a G. Any takers? You can say it. Greed, that's right. And I want to talk about 3 paths to greed. Because I don't think anyone, says, my ambition in life is to be greedy. That's it. I want to be filled with greed. That's my goal in life. No, that doesn't happen. It comes about as a consequence of other things. So 3 paths. The first path to greed is the desire for security. Now, security is a basic human need. There's nothing wrong with the desire for security. We want to take care of ourselves, for our loved ones. We want to be responsible with what we have. However, this desire can too easily lead us to be controlled by fear, because we feel that we have to protect ourselves from potential threats or imagined threats. And so there's always that, what if? Maybe I just need something else. John D. Rockefeller, at the time when he was the richest man on earth, was once asked, how much money is enough? And he famously answered, just a little bit more. And I don't think there's anyone who can't relate to that, no matter our level of wealth. We can all relate to that inkling that, if I just had a little bit more, everything would be fine. We prepare not just for a rainy day, but for 100 rainy days. At least we want to. We can easily become paralyzed, unable to live in the moment and even enjoy what we do have with our loved ones, never mind being generous to others. And it's a form of idolatry because, in a sense, we're putting our faith, our trust in wealth in a way in which we should be putting in God and God's providence. Another path to greed is the desire for status. This is about a human desire to be successful, to win the esteem of others. And the heart of the matter here is our working definition of success. Because whether we are consciously aware of it or it's an unconscious thing, how we define success, what we believe success to be, is going to shape how we live. So if someone was to ask you your definition of success in your life, what would you say? Well, we know what our culture would say. The one who finishes with the most stuff wins. Like, as if life is one big Monopoly game. And because we're in the culture and we're bombarded constantly with advertisements and commercials, that, all commercials come down to this one truth. You ready for this? All commercials, whether it's print, billboards, online, if you don't have this, you're a loser, right? That's basically what every commercial says. So that's what our culture tells us, that this is success, is to have the stuff so that we will win the esteem of others. But real success is being rich in the eyes of God, not in the eyes of our contemporaries. And Jesus reminds us that if we're not right with God, no earthly success is of any lasting consequence. And it's a form of idolatry because, in a sense, we've worshiped the false god. Worship is about sacrifice. And when we seek to put wealth at the center of our lives and we want to get the stuff that we're told will make our lives complete, we have to sacrifice to get these things. And our first reading today from the book of Ecclesiastes, which, by the way, is the most depressing book of the Bible, it speaks about the futility of this kind of sacrifice. The author says this, he asks, what does a person get from all their toil and strain, their toil under the sun, for all their days are full of pain and their work is a vexation, and even at night their minds don't rest. And he says, and in the end, all the stuff you build up, you're going to die anyway, and someone's going to get your stuff. Someone who didn't do any work. So he speaks about the emptiness of this kind of endeavor. So we sacrifice, we worship the wrong God. Like the rich man, we forget that we're not made for this world alone. We are all mortal and we're made for eternity. And finally, there is the desire for pleasure. Now, it's obvious that wealth opens the door for us to enjoy pleasures that we may not have had access to before. Now, I want to begin by saying that pleasure is not bad. I mean, God created us with a capacity to enjoy things, enjoy life, to experience. Pleasure is God's idea, not the devil's idea. This whole idea, if you eat a nice cake, it's sinful, that's silly. God created pleasure. It's a part of our lives. But the problem is not when it's a part of our lives, but when it becomes the center of our lives. When it becomes the primary purpose of our lives, then it becomes idolatry. You see, we're made in love and by love and for love. And our primary purpose is not hedonism, seeking pleasure. Our primary purpose is to love God and to love one another. Everything else will leave us unfulfilled. Now think of the famous philosopher, the famous 20th century philosopher, Mick Jagger. I can't get no. And I try and I try and I try and I try. I can't get no. Now, not sure what he was talking about, but anyway, it's a core human experience. We will never have enough, never be satisfied. Biologically, we know this. When we experience physical pleasure or emotional pleasure, even spiritual pleasure, it's because the body releases dopamine into our system. And the point is that as we grow accustomed to this experience, we need more intense stimulation to get the same hit, the same dopamine hit. That's why we need to have more and more and more and more. And that's how addictions are formed. Because it will never be enough. And we end up pursuing destructive, empty, addictive, and unfulfilling lifestyles. Now, I want to tell you a story about a young man who experienced this himself. He came from his mother was a devout Catholic. His father wasn't a Christian. And he grew up with a kind of restless spirit. And at an early age, he rejected his mother's faith. He thought it was useless. And he set off to pursue a life of greed, really. He sought success and he sought pleasure and his security in earthly things. But it led him to a point in his life where he couldn't go on. And eventually, at a moment of grace, he encountered Jesus in a very powerful way that changed his life. Do you know what? That guy would go on he would get baptized. He would actually become a priest. He became a bishop. And eventually became one of the greatest theologians in the history of the church and became a saint. And his name was Augustine. He lived in the 4th century in North Africa, and he said this: "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." Now, I'm sure these words of St. Augustine, spoken so many years ago, resonate in all of our hearts. And I'm sure we could all affirm that, yes, this is true, I believe this. But even for us who believe this, we still have to heed the words of Jesus, who says, be on guard against all kinds of greed. Because guess what? The temptation to greed is not just for some people or some very rich or wealthy people. Guess what? It's all of us. We all have to struggle with this. We all have to be on guard. And so I'd like to conclude by suggesting 3 simple ways that we can be on guard against all kinds of greed. 3 antidotes to greed. So the first one, you ready for this? First one, it's a bit weird. Visit a cemetery. Seriously. Sometime in the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, go visit a cemetery. Whether you know people there or not, just go visit a cemetery. This is about remembering our mortality. I mean, you know about that, right? Like, we're all going to die. Like, if everyone knows that, right? It's not a shock to anyone, right? Good. Now, this isn't about being morbid. It can be very healthy to do this. You know, what is unhealthy is our culture's denial and avoidance of death. You know, we frantically seek to paint ourselves and get ourselves remade surgically so that we can hold on to some kind of myth of perpetual youth. We're mortal. The clock is ticking in all of us. A healthy sense of our mortality can help us keep things in focus and prevent us from being foolish, like the rich fool. The second antidote is grow your prayer life. Now, over the last couple of weeks here at church, we've been speaking about prayer. A few weeks ago, we talked about how an experience of deep prayer, like prayer in which we are in communion with God, prayer where we may not even use words, is for all of us. It's not just for a few special people. And so we shouldn't settle for a prayer life in which we're simply asking God for stuff or doing all the talking. We need to experience prayer in which we hear God, we listen to God, and that's for all of us. And we need to seek to establish a habit of daily prayer. That's normative for the Christian life, in which we encounter the living God in the power of the Holy Spirit. St. Paul says this, he said this morning, set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on earth. And we'll never be able to do this until we establish a pattern and a habit of daily prayer. The third antidote to greed is be generous. Generosity is the opposite of greed. Generosity is like a muscle. You grow it by using it. And if you don't use it, if you don't exercise it, it atrophies. It needs to be exercised if it's to grow. If God has blessed you with possessions, be generous. Be a blessing to others, especially to the poor, to those in need. So, 3 antidotes to the very real danger of greed. Not just a danger to our eternal lives, but a danger to fulfillment in this present life. God has given us so many good things, but our true happiness, our fulfillment lies not in the gifts, but in the giver of the gifts. As St. Augustine said, you have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you.